Hello and welcome to the No Cricket Podcast. I'm Anurag.
And this is Saurabh.
We're commentators at CricBuzz.
So we watch a lot of cricket.
And that means when everyone's asleep at 3 a.m.,
We're watching cricket.
when it's a Friday evening and you're at the bar,
We're watching cricket.
and when you're stuck in rush hour traffic on Monday morning.
We're watching cricket again.
So naturally, we have a lot of interesting conversations about cricket.
So we thought, why not record them in front of a camera and put them into the wide vast ocean that is the internet.
And that's exactly what we've done.
This is the No Cricket Podcast, where we share our 2 cents about the game that we love so much.
Hello and welcome to the No Cricket Podcast. We've got a very special episode for you all today because it's our first episode with a guest. Please welcome cricket connoisseur and cricket content extraordinaire, Jarrod Kimber.
How you doing?
Hey Jarrod, how are you going?
Yeah, very good.
Awesome. I hear you're joining us from London today.
Yep, that's where I live.
Yeah, early mornings in London. How's it? This time of the year, nice summer going on.
It's a very dry summer, so
Yeah.
it'd be interesting to see how the test series play out. But it's been very dry in the UK so far this year.
Yeah, that should be interesting. So first of all, congratulations, Jarrod, on your book. It's called The
What
Art
book?
of Batting, I believe.
Oh,
Yes.
is it?
Yes,
Are you
show it off
sure?
to our cameras for sure. And so just initial question is, can you tell us more about the book? Like, what is it all about, and what was your motivation to write something like this?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to do something that sort of matched, I suppose, a lot of my different skills together. You know, the previous book was about the history of cricket, you know, and that was really great, but that's kind of like one part of my skill set. And I really wanted to take that and make it a much more use everything. So use the interviewing skills that I have, the research skills that I have, the writing skills, and the analytics, and all together. And I was trying to work out what that would be, and I wondered if I could come up with a list of like great batters. And it kind of changed a little bit as well when I heard a podcast called the Thinking Basketball Podcast, and they had a list of the 50 greatest basketballers, and I kind of realized there was a much better way of doing it than we usually do it in cricket. And that's what I wanted to do. So I wanted to come up with the 50 best batters. Bloomsbury really liked the idea, so that was very handy for me. But then from there, it kind of developed into something else. It kind of developed more into just me asking a bunch of famous cricketers about what batting was, and trying to understand why Len Hutton was so great, right? And trying to understand why Sunil Gavaskar was so great, and all these different players. And and over a period of time, it just became more a book about just great batting more than anything else, with a list in it.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, you obviously spoke to a lot of cricketers as well for this book. So can you just give me some interesting insights that you picked up from cricketers, some interesting anecdotes that came through from all your interviews, perhaps?
Do you know what? One of my favorite was something that Rahul Dravid said, where he was trying to teach a young player about. Do you guys know what the hovering front foot is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for your listeners who may not know, the hovering front foot is essentially, instead of going forward like English players used to originally back in the old days, the idea is that your weight is slightly forward and your foot is on the ground, but it's not actually planted properly, so that you can spring back. You can actually have another step forward and everything else. And so Rahul Dravid was talking about that, and it's such a nerdy thing to talk about. But he was talking about that, and he said, I know the right time to move with that technique. And he said, but I can't coach it to anyone else, because the minute I make it with anyone else that it's, and I try and train them what it is, it goes from being subconscious to being conscious. And once it's conscious, there's like, you get your timings wrong. You either go too early or too late. It has to be something that they work out on their own. So you can teach them the hovering front foot. You can't actually teach them the right way to use the hovering front foot, right? And, that's the sort of thing that you just... It's part of the reason I became a cricket writer in the first place, because these are really important things that people should know about cricket, right? And yet, the vast majority of cricket fans don't know anything about these sorts of things. And, being able to talk to someone like Rahul Dravid about that, and I was very lucky. He gave me an incredible amount of time, especially considering he was planning for a World Cup. It turned out at the end of the interview, he actually just wanted me to go through the squad and how I thought it should be played. So maybe he was using me and I was using him, but that's okay. We're friends. We could do that. But and there was something else that he told me as well, which was kind of similar to that again of, he was talking about when you sort of transition from short pitch bowling with a softball to a hard ball. So obviously, most players at a certain point are, by the time Rahul Dravid sees them, they're used to playing a hard ball. But he kind of wants them to learn their technique against a softer ball so that they don't keep getting hit and getting hurt, right? And he was saying, like, when you're transitioning between that softball and the hard ball, and you're learning how to play the short ball, again, there's no right time. If you do it too early, maybe it'll freak the person out and they'll go from having this good technique to suddenly panicking because the hard ball's coming at them. And if you go too late, they'll be used to the softball, and so they won't handle the hard ball correctly. And it's exactly everything. So many things that Rahul said about that sort of, you can't coach this into someone, right? And that was the big thing that I sort of learned. I kind of figured beforehand that there was an element of, not luck, although luck plays a part, but there's an element of, you can't capture this because we've never had a great father who's had a great son as a batter, right? And it was Rahul that really picked this up as well. But I remember I talked to this guy called Bob Knocker-White. Bob Knocker-White played for about 10 years for Middlesex as a batter in the middle order. He then played for about 10 years for Nottingham in lower middle order, but as a bowler as well. So one of those proper professional cricketers is just like, I'm just going to keep upping my game and hope that I stay in the game as long as possible. And then he umpires for like 30 years. So you basically have 50 years standing on professional cricket ground. And he played with Sobers. And I said, what did you learn from Sobers? And at first he was like, oh, he taught me a bit. But then he's like, actually, I didn't learn anything from Sobers, because the problem is that you would ask Sobers a question and he would give you an answer, but there was no way that you could replicate what Sobers had said. Right? Like he'd say something like, oh, he's bowling outswing to you here. What you want to do is step outside the off stump and flick this over backward square leg for 4. And Bob Knocker-White's like, oh, I can barely hit the outswing when he's bowling it straight. What do you think I'm going to be able to do to like walk across the crease like this? And, there are other players who had similar conversations with that. And, and you start to realize that they can't even, there are little things that they can help each other with at times, but it's much easier for, say, Barry Richards and Gordon Greenidge, who open the batting together, to help each other because they're both freaks. It's very hard for Chris Rogers to learn anything from David Warner at the other end, because Chris Rogers is a different species to David Warner, right? He might end up averaging roughly the same, but when it comes to the hard skills of batting, how early you pick up the ball, how quickly you move into position and everything, Chris Rogers is like a minute behind Warner, right? So you can't learn from those people. And I think that's what Rahul Dravid was really trying to say, is you can kind of put someone into the right position, but you can't actually get them to succeed. And, one of the more important things that I found out during the writing of the book is about the science, right? I'm sure all of us on this call have played cricket before, right?
Yep.
And we can probably all play up to a certain level. But as a batter, your level is really determined, right? Lots of people have batting skill. If you see me go out, you'll see me tap my bat, hold my bat up, move myself in a position, be like, okay, Jarrod looks like he knows what he's doing. If you get someone over 75 miles an hour, I can't pick up the ball anymore. The ball's gone. It doesn't exist to me, right? And so that is a skill called saccading, where basically what you're doing is you're getting all the information from the bowler running in, from the field, from the pitch, and everything else. You're then getting information from the first 3 meters of the ball, and then the next, 12 meters, you're just skipping. And you're putting your eyes where you think the ball is going to land, and therefore the shot that you're going to have to play. And no one knows how to teach another human being how to do this, right? There isn't like another system out there that can help. And so we're in a situation where we know all this information. We know scientifically how to do this. We know what the hovering front foot is, right? We know that, it's better to learn the technique against a short ball, against a soft ball than a hard ball. But we don't know when all these things should be translated over to someone. And we don't know what makes success and what doesn't make success, right? Like, all we know is eventually some of these people have worked it out. And you talk to a lot of players and they'll say, well, when I was 15, 16, this guy was way better than me, right? And what's the difference? They could saccade their eyes and their friend couldn't. And so their friend still looks really good in club cricket, but the minute that cranks up to 80 miles an hour again, they're just missing him.
Yeah.
How is
Go Go on.
Yeah. So how is it writing about these things? Because again, these things that can't necessarily be coached, they can't necessarily be written or explained. So was that a challenge for you? And just to add on, maybe a player who started out and he faced certain troubles, how did he like rectify these things? Did you get some kind of insights about that when you were talking to cricketers?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I've always been lucky in that maybe one of my best skills as a writer has always been the ability to explain complex things in an uncomplex way. So once I understand it and I can talk you through it in a pub, right? I can probably write it in a pretty easy way for even someone who English may not even be their first language. They could probably pretty much follow along. And as part of my success as a writer, for all those years is the fact that someone like Gideon Haig, for someone who's not a brilliant reader and doesn't have a thesaurus next to them, might struggle with. So I have that ability that a lot of other writers don't have, right? Doesn't mean that I'm a better writer than them. It's just a different ability. So for me, once I can get the thing, and I'm a good enough interviewer to try and poke and pod until I get the person to say the thing that makes sense that I can use. So for instance, what I tried to do is explain. I don't think I'd ever actually been able to truly explain what batters are looking at before. And it was Matt Pryor, a conversation with Matt Pryor, where he just said, I watched the ball. And I was like, well, I watched the ball and I can't see it. So what are you actually doing? And then he said, okay, so what I do in my mind is essentially it's like when I'm watching a TV screen, I can blur out everything else. And all I can see is the box in front of me where the ball is bobbling around in the bowler's hand. Right. Now, I'm sure I do that, right? Because otherwise you would struggle to face anyone over about 60 miles an hour, right? But I don't think if you'd asked me to teach anyone else that, I would have been able to do it. Whereas now, once I've been able to do that, I can write about it. I can help 11 and 12-year-olds, as they're coming through cricket with the same understanding of it's like a TV. You just have to zoom into the spot with your eyes and everything else will blur out in the background. And if you can do that, you're in a huge advantage, right? So, there's some fascinating stories. There's probably the two more interesting stories about players failing in the book is one is completely beyond the control of the player, which is Ross Taylor when his eyesight starts to go, when he has he's told me how to pronounce this like 4 times and I always forget it, but it's a pterygium, I think that's right. He had a pterygium on his eyes and it had been there for a little while, but he didn't think it was causing any problems. And then one day he was playing at the Gabba and the clouds came in and he couldn't see the ball. And he goes off and sees a specialist and they're like, yeah, you've got a huge growth on your eye. Like, of course you can't see the ball. And it's always going to be worse in low light than it is in proper light. And he goes off and he fixes that. And he said that, I can't remember if it was after he had the surgery or if it was after he had the drops, but he did both. He started with the drops, then he got the surgery. But he said he's like playing one day and he suddenly realized it was just throwdowns. And he suddenly realized he could see the seam again. He hadn't been seeing the seam for a couple of years. And because these things happen so gradually, he didn't really work it out. And I had a look at his record. He averaged 50 in international cricket in the 2 years before this and 50 in the 2 years after, right? So why he wasn't failing enough that he thought this was an issue, but clearly it's an issue. If you're an international player and you can't see the seam, and then suddenly you get your eyes fixed and you're like, oh, look at the seam. Oh, I forgot the ball's had a seam. Well, that's a pretty big thing, especially facing swing bowling, right? And spin as well, but swing bowling probably at the most. So when I talked to him about it, what the fascinating thing was, he was talking about this low light thing. So we could go off and have a look at it. And I ended up sending him the data after we did the interview going, yeah, you should never have played night cricket. You were terrible. And he thought it was just like for a couple of years, but his whole early career up until he had this was completely stunted. So if New Zealand batted first, no problem in a one-day international. If New Zealand bat second, Ross Taylor might as well be a bowler. Right, like his record dropped so much, he's more like a number 7 or a number 8 at that point. Same thing happens in T20 cricket. If he plays a night game, it was dreadful. If he plays a day-night game and he plays in the first innings, he's fine. If he plays a day game, he blitzes everyone, right? And so the batters don't even know always what's happening, right? Syed Anwar told a story, and I got this from Cheryl Calder, who's a doctor in Cape Town who's worked with Bob Woolmer and Tim Noakes and all the famous sort of scientists that come out, sports scientists that come out of Cape Town, and she was saying that Syed Amar came to her and said, I can't pick this new bowler. And it was Murali. And the problem was that Murali's hands had moved, right? Because a normal spinner comes in and does this, right? Whereas he was coming in and doing this. It's a completely different movement, right? So inside Anwar's brain, he couldn't work out where to look. So he had to be trained on where to look. And then you know, the other great story is Jimmy Adams, where I say to Jimmy Adams, like, all these things happen to you in your career. And someone should, Jimmy Adams' career is almost like a book. It's so like, there's so many highs and lows. But essentially, for about 2 years, he's the best batter in the world, overshadowing Brian Lara in his own side at times, right? Then people start to work out, the umpires start to work out that he's using the pad too much. So they start to give him out LBW a little bit. So that changes things, but he's still pretty good. Then he gets hit by a really brutal bouncer in English cricket. But he doesn't think that played a big part. Then he gets stabbed with a fork, I think, at one stage, or something. Something happens to him on a plane or something with a teammate. I don't even know if Jimmy's ever given me the full details of what happened there. And so in my mind, as a cricket person, I'm like, okay, so it was the pads. And he's like, yeah, a little bit, but I was actually still batting okay. Well, it was getting hit by the short ball. He's like, it didn't really affect me. I still felt like I was fine against the short ball afterwards. I'm like, well, what about, you know, the hand? He's like, no. He goes, and he was just like, I think I just got, I'm trying to remember the exact word. I think he called it burnout. Just for 3 years, he did nothing but play cricket. And he played cricket everywhere. And it was all he ever thought about. And he didn't know how to handle his personality, his life, his day-to-day existence, and it just collapsed on him, right? And he was never, and if you meet Jimmy Adams, he's one of the smartest, you know, former cricketers you'll ever come across. Like, he's really eloquent, he really thinks about things, you know, all these sorts of things. And you could see how he's the sort of person that it just got in his head, right? And he couldn't get it back out of his head. And so you have all these different stories of all these different players of, like, sometimes they overcome it and sometimes they don't, right? And in Jimmy Adams' case, we never saw the best of Jimmy Adams ever again after that. He was a shadow of the former batter that he had been.
Absolutely. I think talking about great batters, it's a great time to maybe segue about two of the great batters who've retired from Test cricket very recently. Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma announced their Test retirement. So, firstly, Jarrod, thoughts on their retirement, thoughts on their playing career, and also, do you think the BCCI or cricket boards in general can do better to salute or like to give a farewell for their legends?
I mean, if you're in the middle of a period where someone wants to retire, it's a bit weird to then say, okay, well, in 2 months' time, do you want to play one more test? Right? We've seen it. I'm not saying it's never happened, but it also depends on the player, right? Like, my guess is that the way they retired is probably how they wanted to retire, as in they wanted to announce it themselves and, you know, get in front of it. If there was a test being played in a week's time, they probably both would have played, right? Like, they probably both would have been ready for it. So I think we get a little bit hung up because occasionally we're really lucky and we get a great player who can go out on top and play one last test, right? But that doesn't always happen. Right? Sometimes great players are dropped. Sometimes they're injured. Sometimes the next test is just too far away and they can't, and they're just like, I can't be ready in 8 months' time. It will take 8 months of preparation for me to be ready for 8 months' time for one game, right? Like, you know, there are all these different things. Look, Rohit is probably one of the big what if players. He's probably an ideal number 4. And unfortunately for him, he couldn't play in that position because India had so many other options during his time. He ends up down the order a little bit and then bumbles his way back up to opening, has a brilliant career opening all right up until his last year, and then it just drops off again, right? But up until that last year, like, you know, when we were writing the book, we were like, if Rohit has one more big year, are we going to have to put him in this book? Like, there was a couple of guys. Usman Khawaja was another one. We were like, are these guys going to slip into this book? Like, because we did not, we have not factored them in at all. And I think both Rohit and Usman had a bit of a form dip just as we were finishing the book, and we we're like, oh, thank fuck for that. We don't have to worry about that anymore, right? But you look at what he did over a short period of time, and I think with Rohit, I think I did a piece on him the other day of, I don't think he goes down as a great batter in the history of Test cricket. I think he goes down as one of a great Indian Test batter. I don't think there's any issues there. But his ability to play a great innings is up there with those sorts of guys like VVS Laxman and Hanif Mohammed. maybe you put Damian Martin, someone like that in that list as well, where you're just like, they would play a great innings when no one else could play a great innings, but they didn't have the consistency or the range of maybe some of the other great players who were consistently doing that. It's still a form of greatness. It's just a different kind.
Do you agree, though, that the timing of the retirements of both of these players feels a little bit off? Because considering both of them came out and played the Ranji Trophy just before the IPL, there were indications that they probably wanted to carry on. Do you think they were pushed out in any sort of manner?
I'm sure they'll tell us. I'm not sure what the point of speculating on that sort of stuff is, because it will come out, right? And so, like this week, when Virat retired, everyone was contacting me going, "Look, Rohit hasn't sent an Instagram post about Virat, and Virat hasn't." And I was just like, maybe he sent a WhatsApp, dude. Like, I don't know. Maybe send a Signal message. I don't know. You're right. I don't know what to do with that information. It's very possible. I think if we're being really honest, they both wanted to play in the World Test Championship final. And maybe what has happened over the last couple of weeks is them being like, do we really want to play against England? And maybe they had to make those decisions. It seems to me from the outside, without knowing either of these men particularly well, that it's the 50 over World Cup that is the thing, that is their next big challenge, their last big challenge, the last dance. Maybe we should start a documentary on that behind the scenes. But I think that is the interesting thing from here on in, right? They basically want to get to a position where they can do that, and so they're both stopped international T20 cricket. They're both stopped international Test cricket. Now they have a chance, I think, to focus on that goal and get themselves there. It's much easier at their age to prepare for IPL and 50 over World Cup than it is for everything, right? So, yeah, maybe it was. Maybe the powers that be just went, look, we're reloading anyway. Like, what are you going to get out of this? And what happens if you fail? Might be being the other one, right? Like Virat's legacy. When I started the book, I promise you, I was like, oh, people are going to be so unhappy with how low I have him in the book, right? By the time I finished the book, people were complaining that he might be in the book. And I was like, he actually didn't move that many places for me, right, while writing the book. But I think that just tells you everything, right? Like that is Virat Kohli. That is the way that people sort of look at these things, and there's not much you can do about that sort of stuff. And so that's why there's going to be speculation like this and everything else. As we know, though, the BCCI leaks like a sieve, so I'm sure we'll find out something soon.
What went wrong with Virat Kohli's career? But why? What explains this kind of dip in this Test form? Like, if you could just give us some more information.
I don't know if I've ever seen this on a player of his level before. I think Shane Watson is a really interesting one, where Shane Watson's technique was absolutely perfect for Test cricket for someone of his size with his hitting ability. And then someone went, what if we bring DRS in? And suddenly Shane Watson's technique was absolutely terrible for Test cricket, right? And I'm trying to think of some of the other players. You probably have some great players in the 70s who by the 80s aren't really all that effective anymore, because in the 70s, you're facing spin bowlers and you're dealing with swing bowling. And by the 80s, everyone's bowling at your head, right? So once those sorts of things start to change, it's very hard. Now, generally, those changes don't happen everywhere. Like Shane Watson's still going to be playing in Asia, right? Like and it was pace bowling with the LBW that was his big problem with DRS. The fascinating thing with Virat Kohli is that we always knew that Virat Kohli pushed a little bit too hard outside off stump, and that he played this cover drive, which was his defensive and attacking mechanism at the same time to that ball, and that it didn't always work. And sometimes he made it work just through sheer force of will. Fine. I think we can all accept that that was Virat Kohli's role in all of this. What changes is that ball that was tormenting him was bowled by about 5 people. Then it was bowled by 200 people, right? So the delivery that Jimmy Anderson is using is now the most common delivery in the world, right? We didn't even know what it was when Jimmy Anderson was first using it, right? Like it wasn't, the wobble ball was barely mentioned. There was a little bit of mentions of scrambled seam when it came to Stuart Clark and to Muhammad Asif, but it wasn't a big deal. Now, the wobble ball is huge. And so that didn't just affect Virat Kohli. That affected all of cricket. The global averages just dropped, right? There's about, I think there's, of the 40 batters, or maybe it's 30 batters, the 30 batters who batted 1,000 runs before and after it, there were like 4 that had a higher average in the 4 years after that change, right? Like, that's massive. I've never seen anything like that before, right? That is just dropping a bomb on test match batting averages. So everyone dropped. The problem with Virat is he then went back to India, and from 2021 or whenever it was onwards, those wickets were spinning sideways. They were impossible to bat on, right? So now you have a situation where he can't hide at home, right, and cash in. He was averaging, he ends up averaging 57 against the spinning ball in Test cricket, right? And I think there's only 1 year where he averages under 50 against the spinning ball before 2021. Right? Then he starts averaging 25 and 28 against the spinning ball. Are we saying he lost the physical ability to play a cricket ball? Well, that's not what we see in other formats. He's still doing well in other formats, right? So what has changed? Well, the wickets have changed. We all know the wickets changed, right? So with the wobble ball, the ball changed, a little bit of the wickets changed, and the bowlers changed. And specifically what happened to him at home. So you have a player who then did not really handle either of those changes. I think, that probably affects where he ends up on the list of the greatest batters of all time, but it probably doesn't change where he ends up on the greatest Indian batters of all time. I think there are 3 Indian batters that are clearly above him, right? And I don't think he's suddenly worse than Virender Sehwag, who also had major flaws in various parts of his game, right? Like, there were, Virender Sehwag is an absolute legend, but I don't think he suddenly is better than Virat Kohli because of this, because as good as Sehwag was, you always knew that it was a little bit dependent on where he was going to be playing, right? Whereas with Kohli, for about 7 or 8 years, it didn't matter where he was playing, right? Like, he could have been playing on the moon. He could have been playing in a jungle. He was probably still going to make runs. He was still going to have a factor, or going to work it out the next time he came back, right? Whatever that may be. So you end up with a situation there where he just didn't adapt to what he had to. And Javed Miandad, Gordon Greenidge, Ricky Ponting are 3 players off the top of my head that had long tails on the end of their careers. The difference is they had long tails on the end of their careers when the batting averages in the world were pretty normal, and they could still go home and make runs. When Virat Kohli did it, the batting averages in the world were about as low as they have ever been before, and he couldn't make runs at home.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what do you think this team looks like going ahead, like the Indian team? Who are the players you're most excited to watch for maybe the next decade or half decade or so? And this England tour, if you can highlight what kind of players you're excited to see.
I mean, Jaiswal, as someone who's just written a book about the history of Test batting, Jaiswal has as high a batting ceiling as anyone I've ever covered. That doesn't mean he ends up being Don Bradman or Sachin Tendulkar. But also, you look at the skills that he has, and it's hard to see how it's hard to see how he doesn't make a lot of runs in Test cricket, right? He just looks so naturally suited to making runs in Test cricket in a way that even some of the other good young players coming around, like Harry Brook and Mendes, I think they're really exciting as well. But I think I could see more things that can go wrong with them than I can see with Jaiswal. So I think Jaiswal is really interesting, such a high ceiling and probably a fairly high floor as well. Like, I don't, maybe he ends up averaging 45, which, to be fair, in modern cricket would still be really good. That's a really high floor for a player. A lot of things would have to go wrong for him to crash through something like that. So I think he's really exciting. There's obviously a lot of younger batting talent coming through in general that is really exciting. I'm really excited about Washington Sundar to see how he develops, because he's a weird mix at the moment between Ashwin and Jadeja, right? Rather than replacing just Ashwin, he's actually kind of bats more like Jadeja than he does Ashwin. And maybe he can become a Ashwin-like bowler on the road. And they're going to need a frontline spinner who can probably bat at 7 to give them more flexibility. And Prasidh Krishna, I've liked Prasidh Krishna for a long time. He's not particularly tall, but he's got a really high release, and I like the way he hits the wicket. He feels like a test bowler to me, I suppose, is the best way of looking at him. So those are probably the most exciting ones. But yeah, this is a team going through a reload, right? Like, we all knew it was coming. I think it's a little bit sad for me that like I lived through the West Indies era, but I wasn't old enough to really understand what was happening. And so you have a whole generation of West Indian cricketers retire, and then they just continue to be that good, right? And it takes them another 9 years before it winds down. Whereas with Australia, Warner McGrath go, and there's an obvious dip for a little while, then they start to reload, and it's two different generations, and no one can make any argument that there's not a gap between those two different generations, right? And I was thinking that the India one would have been nice if we could have another period of like the same team dominating for a long period of time. That's already over, right? Because they lost two test series in a row. So even mathematically, we have to, I think we all have to be honest. If you lose a test series at home and you lose a test series away, you're not the West Indies anymore, are you? Like that's not something that the West Indies did in their run, right? So again, it's slightly different. So that means that also gives India the chance of not having to hang on to a bunch of players and like, you know, try and make sure that they keep being good. They can actually just refresh. And maybe that's what, you know, we were talking about before with Rohit and Virat perhaps being moved on. I mean, Ashwin was essentially moved on, right? They said, you're not going to be playing for the next 9 or 10 months. We will use you again when we need to use you. And he was like, well, I'm Ashwin. I don't need to wait for you guys. I'm off. But again, that, as I said, once they lost to New Zealand, I think that makes all those decisions much easier, right? Of like, look, Virat, Rohit, you've been really great. If you want to play for longer, we will work out a way to make it happen. But we do want to reload this team and start again.
From an England point of view, do you think it's the best time for them to be playing India with like 3 really experienced players moving out?
I don't think that changes this series all that much because Ashwin wasn't going to play anyway, was he? Right. So chances are he was only going to play in 1 test, maybe 2 tests, if we're being optimistic. The Kohli and Rohit stuff means that Ben Stokes has a big advantage when it comes to leadership and strategy, doesn't he? Like you're taking a lot of knowledge out of that team. But considering what did Rohit average last year, like 23, 24, and Kohli, I don't know, I can't even remember what his mark was. Yeah, I think you'd have to argue that you can replace their batting from last year, right? Like if you find 2 replacement level batters, they should be able to make roughly the same amount of runs. So I don't think there's any issue when it comes to the runs, but the leadership and the experience and, you know, English tours, you know, it's not like playing in Australia, but places like Edgbaston and Old Trafford, the crowd can get on top of you, right? Like, you know, there are moments where that will happen. And they're going to have to go up against an England side that is very good at disrupting you. They're not a very good side, but they are very good at disrupting you. And so one of the things that you want when that is a leader to go, come on, we've seen all this before. It's fine. They'll punch themselves out in a minute, right? So I do think that there is an element of that, you know, and I don't think Shubman Gill. If you're asking me what I think of Shubman Gill as a captain at the moment, the word would be competent, right? I don't think he's a strategic genius. I don't think he's a leader of men. I don't think he's a lead by example type of person, but he's competent. You know, England will use that against him, right? They will, you know, they will already be discussing that this is going to be a very different competition than them going up against Rohit. But England's not very good. Let's also remember that. England's not actually that good a team.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, you said that the replacement batters can do well enough and get the runs that Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma got last year. But who do you think those guys will be? I mean, there are plenty of names in contention, but I wanted to hear who you think will be making the cut.
I don't know. I haven't really thought about what the selection will be. I suppose because part of it will be where does Shubman Gill want to bat, right? Doesn't a lot of it depend on where he ends up in the order? So he's either going to go up a spot or down a spot, isn't he? So if he goes down a spot and he ends up at number 4, then obviously you're looking at another opener, and then they're going to have to find a number 3. If he goes up a spot, then it probably makes more sense for Carroll to bat at number 4, and perhaps for them to again try and find that number 3. And in England, this is, as I said, a very dry summer, so maybe it's a little bit different. But in England in general, you quite often go with the number 3 as a backup opener, right? Like that's kind of how you think about these sorts of things. So someone like Karan Nair would probably makes a lot more sense now, whereas we were talking about him a couple of weeks ago about, can they fit him into the test side? Now you're just like, he probably makes a lot more sense coming in. And Sai Sudarshan is probably the other one that makes a lot of sense, right? These are 2 guys that have been dominating cricket over the last couple of years at domestic level. One of them is born mature. The other one has attained, wisdom over going through this incredible path to be back where he is. So I would assume that them and KL are that sort of the backbone of that area, and I assume that Sai would bat at 3, and maybe then you can move KL down to 5, and have who have I got at 4 in that one? Karan Nair at 4, or you can mix that around a little bit if you want to be as well, and then of course you have Rishabh and Jadeja after that. But again, that also depends on where Shubman Gill wants to go, right? If Shubman Gill wants to open, does that might change things a little bit as well in the way that you think about things.
Absolutely, that's interesting because those are the 2 players I had in my 11 as well. If I can quickly go through how I see things, I actually had KL Rahul moving up to open the innings, and
also possible,
going down to 4. So do you think that's something that could happen? And then I only had one of Sai Sudarshan or Karan Nair with someone like Nitish Reddy and Ravindra Jadeja manning the middle order.
Well, I think Nitish Reddy, if he plays in this side, is going to bat at 8. Unless something massively changes, I would assume that they want him in 8 because they want to. That's what they've already used him for before. Everything I've ever heard out of the Shubman Gill camp has told me that he wants to open, and that's the position that he has been waiting for. Now, he might have been saying that because there was a number 4 that he wasn't going to move. So he could go in either direction, as I said. I don't think that matters. Maybe the safest thing is you almost say, Shubman, where do you want to bat? And then you say to KL, you do the other one, right? So Shubman wants to open, great. KL bats at 4. Shubman wants to bat at 4, great. KL, you open. Maybe that's the easy shortcut option of this, depending on how you look at it.
Do you think India should be planning and selecting for this tour differently, considering the pitches that might be on offer this time around with the Bazball era out in England?
As I said, the wickets are dry, so I think you have to bring a second spinner just in case, because you have Jadeja. I think that Washington as your number 8, not quite as good a batter as Nitish Reddy, but he can do the job, and he might be a more important bowler at times. I don't think Ben Stokes would want to face too much Washington on, 3rd and 4th innings wickets with how dry it's been in the UK so far. So I think you have to bring that extra spinner from that point of view. I think you also have to have a squad that allows you to play 4 frontline seamers and just forget about the number 8 position. Void the number 8 position and just be like, we've got the world's best number 7. Let's just not worry about it. So those are probably the 2 major things that I'd be thinking about, because you've got some flexibility in the squad built in with Juve Jarrell, right, and KL Rahul. Like they actually have flexibility when it comes to wicket keeping and batting options and batting numbers. So I don't think they need like millions of extra batters around in the squad, but I think the ability to have an extra spinner or to have 4 frontline seamers at any stage. So So have a squad that allows for that already would be a big advantage, I think.
And just talking about England cricket now, they are going to be playing a 4-day test against Zimbabwe very soon. And that's quite interesting, to be honest, to see tests shift to 4 days. Do you think that's one way to keep this format alive?
So there's an argument for playing 4-day tests, and then you play every single test match Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which is the golf model, right? one of the problems with the 5 days is that it doesn't really give you enough time to rest and relax and everything else. Also, we're playing cricket at such a fast pace now that the 5th day is not as relevant as it would have been back in ye olde times. Look, we've played 3-day tests, 4-day tests, 5-day tests, 6-day tests, 7-day tests, and timeless tests in cricket. So it's not as if any of this is new. New Zealand used to play 3-day tests for a long time when they came to England, despite the fact that other teams didn't. So from that perspective, it is, something that we have done before. The issue that I think they might have now is that they want to play 4-day tests, but they want to play them with more overs. So that isn't the case when you play against Zimbabwe or Ireland, where you're probably more willing to be like, it's fine. But when you actually do start to play proper games, you probably want more than 90 overs a day, and we're not even getting 90 overs a day. So how many overs are we actually going to lose from potential test matches? And we're in the first period in test cricket history where the draw is almost irrelevant, right? Which means someone wins, someone loses. We've had incredible matches over a long period of time. Do we really want to bring the draw back in, right? Do we really want to be in a situation? Now, the argument that sort of is a bit more wishy-washy is one of the reasons we don't have draws at the moment is not just because batters are more attacking. It's also because teams are trying to manufacture results because they need the points for World Test Championships, right? So when you have a table and it's actually accurate and people care about it, it means that you will go into a series going, we have to have results, right? Look at Pakistan. Their pitches, they literally stuffed up a whole World Test Championship thing by making their pitches impossible to get results on, and unless you batted like England, right? And so that they had a huge chance of making that final, and they completely balls it up. I don't think we'll see many teams do that anymore. So then 4 days is probably enough, right? Like it's probably enough at that point. But to go back to my point before, if we're not bowling 90 overs already, which we're not, that's going to be more of an issue in this kind of system than it would be in anything else. But to add to that is you are now competing with T20 cricket for players, right? Especially more so in the future when the IPL owners get more and more powerful. I want the best fast bowler to play for my country, and I now want him to bowl an extra 4 overs a day compared to just 4 overs a day. I don't know how you guys go, but if CricBuzz suddenly came to you guys and said, would you like to get paid the same amount of money for a tweet a day or for an essay? You're probably going to say, do you know what? I can do a tweet a day. I don't know if I can pull out an essay a day, guys. I might struggle on that, right? So we have to factor that in as well. I think we'll see more 4-day tests in the future when they're not marquee matches. And also, I do think it's a good idea for teams like Sri Lanka and the West Indies to have it over the weekend. Make sure that everyone can come to hopefully the last 2 days that are really exciting. Because we've never had trouble in Test cricket of getting people to go to the first couple of days of Test matches. It's the back end of games that we struggle, right? Like you go to Australia, there's no one there after day 2, day 3, right? Unless it's the SCG. Most of those grounds are nowhere near capacity by day 3, day 4, day 5, right? Unless something special is happening or there is a weekend or whatever, right? So can we come up with a system where we could do that? Yes. Can it actually build in more rest? Fine. But the one thing I would say against all this, and this is why it's such a confusing and silly topic, is that do you know what streaming platforms want? More content. I don't want a day less of content. I want more content. Test cricket is actually built, weirdly enough, not for fans in the ground, not for TV companies, right? It's actually built for streaming platforms more than anything else, which is remarkable considering it, predates streaming platforms by about 140 years. But that's where we are. That's the situation that we're in. So you have this situation there where you don't want to be in a situation where you lose some of your uniqueness and your selling opportunities. But at the same time, there are benefits to 4-day test matches. And I kind of think in the future, you just make a decision, right? I think the worry that we would have is to go back to the old England model, which is kind of what they're doing to Zimbabwe and kind of what they did to Ireland, which is when we play the teams we don't think are very good, we'll pick 4 days. That causes issues. And that's why New Zealand came over in 1949 and decided to draw every test match beforehand. They basically didn't pick bowlers for the whole series. They just picked all their batters. No one wants that. It was horrible, right? I mean, it was great for New Zealand cricket. It changed everything, but it wasn't great cricket because everyone knew what New Zealand were going to try and do. And then they did it, which made it even worse, right? Like you just like the start of day 3, New Zealand's still batting in their first innings. Who wants that, right? Like, you know, that's not the cricket that we want to watch. So there's so many moving parts to the 4-day argument, I think, and it's not an easy one.
Well, you say that that streaming platforms want more content, right? By trimming off the 5th day, is there a potential to have more matches and therefore more content? You mentioned teams like Sri Lanka, West Indies, and maybe even South Africa falls into that bracket these days because they don't play a lot of Test cricket, right? Will 4-day Test
I don't think you'd play matches until you're making money. And also, the whole idea of the 4-day Test match is really to cash in on that weekend. And so you still can only play one a week. So you would play from Thursday to Sunday, and then you have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off, and then you do it again. So you wouldn't fit any extra Test matches in, I wouldn't think. The only other difference I would say is that the 5th day is a real pain. And it's a real pain because it's hard to get freelancers. You kind of have to say, it's like, so when I'm a cricket commentator, I've had production companies say to me, we'll pay you for the first 4 days, and then if it goes to a 5th day, we'll pay you. And I always say, well, then I may not be available on the 5th day. I might have to take another job. And then they're like, oh, of course. Okay, we'll pay you for all 5 days. And I'm like, yes, you'll pay me for all 5 days, right? Do you know how many freelancers work at a cricket ground, right? Bar staff, food staff, security staff, right? Groundsmen, whatever it may be, all these different people who are brought in for that one thing are involved in that one. So it's actually the 5th day does cause issues already, but having 4 days doesn't necessarily solve all those issues. It brings about new and different issues.
And that was the episode. We hope you enjoyed Jarrod's anecdotes and insights as much as we did. Don't forget to check out Jarrod's new book called The Art of Batting, and also all of his other work. The links for all of those will be down in the description below. If you enjoyed that episode, do make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more from us. Until next time, goodbye.